I remember years ago when Final Fantasy VII came out, there was a conversation around Final Fantasy VII being the best Final Fantasy game of all time, and there was a contingent of people who loved Final Fantasy VI and said that Final Fantasy VII was a bit of a departure from the series and that Final Fantasy VI was the pinnacle of Final Fantasies. Now, I didn't play Final Fantasy VI when it first came out. My first Final Fantasy was Mystic Quest, and then my first in the numbered series was Final Fantasy VIII. And then I did go back eventually and play Final Fantasy VII, and that's when I remembered some people didn't like Final Fantasy VII as much as Final Fantasy VI, and that really blew my mind because I absolutely loved Final Fantasy VII. I did end up buying the anthology edition of Final Fantasy on the PlayStation back in the day, which had Final Fantasy VI on it. I remember trying to play it, but then just falling off pretty shortly and just thinking, there's no way that this game's as good as Final Fantasy VII. But this year I did go back and try to go all the way through Final Fantasy VI, and I succeeded. Last week I beat Final Fantasy VI for the first time. So how well does the game hold up in 2023? I would say that it definitely holds up enough to warrant a full playthrough if you're interested in the older Final Fantasy games. The game's full of charm, secrets, wonderful music, and endearing characters. But it is an RPG from the 90s, and while it's not outright super difficult, the game doesn't hold your hand at all. It has its fair share of enemies that will one-shot your characters or even your party if you're not paying attention. And there's puzzles in the game that you must figure out to progress the game. I ended up playing the game completely blind, going through it and experiencing these puzzles, allowing myself to get stuck and try to figure it out. I wanted to see what the game would be like if I played it back in the day when you didn't just have Google at your fingertips. At least it started out that way. Towards the end of my playthrough, I did end up looking up some guides to get through dungeons. Random encounters is one of those old mechanics that, while some games still do them, you can absolutely understand why games have moved away from them. In some of these dungeons, I would get a little bit lost and I would take a few steps, go into a random battle, and it would last just long enough that I forgot which way I was walking. I would end up walking the other way and then realize, oh wait, I was supposed to go back this way. And then by the time I got back, I would just be in another random encounter. This kind of gameplay can just be extremely frustrating, and it's probably why I bounced off it when I tried playing it before. But I tried to just enjoy it and laugh it off when frustrating things like this would happen, but sometimes I did need to put the controller down for a couple minutes. But because I played the game mostly blind, I didn't get every secret item, every secret character, and also let some of my characters die because I didn't know any better. Overall, I feel like I got a good experience of what Final Fantasy VI would have been like playing it in 1994 when it came out. And I left enough things undone or unexplored that I do feel like I would probably have a good time returning to the game and trying to do a more completionist playthrough. And if I would recommend anybody else to play this game, I would say I probably would recommend that you try to do some of the secret stuff and maybe look up guides for it. I know that's a little bit counterintuitive, that's not how I played it, but later in the game when things got a little bit difficult in the final dungeon, the most fun thing for me was when I did find out I did have a master scroll that allows you to attack multiple times with the character.
Do I have to activate it or do I just attack 4 times when I attack? 1, 2, 3, 4!
I suppose I would probably recommend some type of a hybrid playthrough where I would look up some of the secrets, things like items or secret characters that I missed. I do feel like there's no harm in just looking that stuff up and experiencing it. If I were to do it again, I would definitely try to get all the characters, make sure everybody survives, and I would try to get some Genji gloves, try and get some more of the Master Scrolls or whatnot so I could do some of those crazy combos where you're just doing an insane amount of damage. It's kind of cheap and kind of not fair, but I do think it makes it more fun.
Okay, I'm actually stoked now that I figured I have the masters. See how much happier I am when I can do 4 attacks?
But that's totally up to you, that's just my advice. But what stood out most to me in this game was the game's charm. The game is full of it. Its storytelling is short and sweet. It doesn't overly explain itself or overstay its welcome like some other Final Fantasies do. It keeps its storytelling moments short and to the point, and I really appreciated that. I could totally see Final Fantasy VI being redone with more dialogue, more story, voice acting, and motion capture. And I think if it did that, there maybe would be room for a little bit more depth, a little bit more storytelling. But I think the game as it is right now is a great package based off the limitations of the hardware. So is Final Fantasy VI the pinnacle of Final Fantasy? Well, I could easily understand people saying that Final Fantasy VI is their favorite of the series. There's plenty of things to love. I think personally I do enjoy Final Fantasy VII a little bit more. The slightly smaller but more focused cast of characters, the unique diesel punk aesthetic of Final Fantasy VII, accompanied with some of the best tracks in the series, Final Fantasy VII is definitely a special standout for me. But that's not to say that Final Fantasy VI isn't special in its own right. Its soundtrack is phenomenal as well, and the main enemy of Final Fantasy VI, Kefka, is just as iconic, if not more, than Sephiroth. Though, admittedly, probably less known than Sephiroth. After all, Kefka's not in Kingdom Hearts, is he? But there's no wonder that there's an audience for games like Octopath Traveler and other 16-bit RPGs. The simplicity of these 2D sprite animated games harkens back to a simpler time when we would wake up on Saturday morning before anybody else in the house is awake to play our favorite games. Before your parents would make you do chores or go outside. And while I think it would be ridiculous to say that Final Fantasy VI holds up to other modern contemporary titles today, I don't think it's ridiculous to say that this game is special and very much worth playing if you're interested in the series and these older RPGs. But to be honest, you probably already know that. The people that are watching videos about Final Fantasy VI today are probably already very aware and have a special place in their heart for this game. With that being said, I don't feel like I need to give this game a rating out of 10. This game is good. It's a good game. I think it speaks for itself, and it's already shown that it has lasted the test of time. And thus concludes my review of Final Fantasy VI. If you're new to my channel, I make videos about story-based games and RPGs. If that's something that you're into, please remember to like, subscribe, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.